Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar Top 10 video. This one's going to be my Top 10 Fantasy Avatar and Korra fights. So an explanation for this is just, these are 10 fights that I think would be really cool to see. They're definitely not like canonical or anything like that. I'm mixing up time periods, different shows, certain characters at certain times versus other characters at a certain point in their life. I've been fairly specific with this to, in my opinion, get some of the more interesting fights that I think could potentially take place given what we know of the universe so far. So, before I even get into the list, I'll just say that I did actually find this pretty difficult to do, to make a list of just 10 fights that were interesting, were relatively even, and that they had something, I suppose, unique to them. That it wasn't just, oh, this character against this character because we haven't seen it before. So I really put a lot of effort into this. But in the comments, I definitely want your own fantasy fights like that you think would work really well. And I'd also say before I even get into the top 10, I don't have a topic for the next Avatar top 10 video planned out. So in the comments, let me know, give me some suggestions for what you think I should do next week for the top 10 video. But let's get into this. Number 10 would be the fight that I think would be really cool to see would be Katara versus Pakku round 2. Now their first fight, towards the end of book 1, was a really good fight, probably the best waterbending we'd seen up to that point. And it was with a Katara who really didn't have any proper formal training, really. She was basically self-taught and put up a good fight against a master. He then trained her, and she basically became a master over the course of this series. And in Korra, we know she effectively becomes that kind of elder, super respected character. But I would like to see these two fight in a way where it is more even, like that Katara has a chance to actually win this fight. That maybe after the end of the series, like Katara, post 321 or something like that, versus Pakku when, he's still not really old to the point where Katara's age would give her an advantage, but she has the experience from the whole war basically that she could actually have a chance of beating him. And she has all these, because of her travels, she has all of these new experiences, and that she's learned a little bit of southern style waterbending from Hama. She knows bloodbending if needed. She knows, a little bit of swamp style because she's encountered them, and so on. She has all these new techniques that she learned from traveling that maybe Pakku won't know himself. So she's got a little bit of an advantage there. He obviously has the experience completely. But I just think it would be a really cool fight to see. Just two master waterbenders going up against each other. Would Katara win as the character that we follow through the entire series becoming a master waterbender, or the one who's already a master waterbender? I think the animation and stuff like that for the first fight was great. Imagine that done to level 11 basically. Number 9 is going to be Mako versus Zuko. I think this would be a really cool fight. And obviously I'm going more for basically, like Mako as we see him in Korra basically versus Zuko from Avatar The Last Airbender time. I'm not saying young Mako against old Zuko here. Basically, these two from basically the end of their respective series. So Zuko is a really good firebender. Mako obviously a proven firebender as well. What I think makes this fight very interesting is that Zuko is kind of the story of this guy struggling from being, originally like a fairly average firebender to gradually learning to become an extremely powerful firebender, with learning the true way of firebending from the dragons, learning lightning redirection from his uncle, and stuff like that. And as we see him, he becomes the Fire Lord. In Korra, he's really respected because of his power. Whereas Mako is more of the prodigal firebender. Not quite Azula levels, but still. He is praised multiple times throughout Korra for being incredibly powerful by Amon, who doesn't really compliment anyone else, apart from Mako and his skill. Mako can generate lightning. I think some of the scenes imply he has the redirection technique, and he's just naturally really powerful as well. So I think it would be a good matchup between the two, in that Zuko may have the advantage in just the power of his normal firebending because of learning from the dragons and the true way of firebending, whereas Mako maybe is the more intelligent one in terms of like tactics during the fight, and maybe has the better skill set of actual moves with lightning generation as well. But again, that's kind of negated by the fact that Zuko has redirection, but then Mako kind of has redirection so himself. So I think that will be a really even fight, and definitely wouldn't just go to Zuko because Zuko's maybe a more popular character. I think that's a very interesting fight if it ever happened. And number 8 is a pro bending match between the Fire Ferrets versus a team made up from Team Avatar. So I think the three I came up with was Katara, Toph, and Zuko. But I suppose you could sub in Aang for someone there. I suppose if you had to do it, you'd maybe take out Zuko and then Aang would be the firebender on the team. But maybe it's not the best element to go with because Korra is the waterbender on her team and she's naturally a waterbender. So I don't know, if air was part of pro bending, it'd be a lot easier of a fight. And maybe, as time progresses in the Avatar universe, pro bending will gradually introduce airbending as a kind of thing. So you're actually allowed to choose like 3 of the 4 elements to be on your team. Airbending, I think, has a huge advantage over the rest of them in that the whole aim of the game is like about pushing people back, and a basic airbending blast does that by default. So airbending might make the game unfair, but still, just this idea of like Korra, Mako, Bolin against Katara, Toph, Zuko, that would be really interesting. Obviously, like in terms of setup for the fight, you'd probably have it like so that you give the ATLA characters a chance to like understand the rules, maybe have a few practice matches. But I think it would work just because, their Team Avatar, here's another Team Avatar. I still think the Fire Ferrets would win just because they seem more kind of athletic in that sort of sense, that it's a sport. Maybe it was just a standard fight of like Team Avatar old versus Team Avatar new, it would be a lot more even, but probably the Fire Ferrets win this match. But I still think it would be really cool to see kind of old generation versus new generation pro bending match. Next up, number 7. It's a fight between animals, and I'd like to see a fight between the Badger Moles, dragons versus Sky Bison. Unfortunately, obviously the original waterbender is the moon. You can't really involve the moon in the fight. They don't really have a animal that represents them massively. So I guess between the other 3, I think it would be a really interesting fight because obviously each of these animals can bend in some way. The dragons can breathe fire. They can also fly. Sky bisons can fly as well. They can create huge gusts of wind with just kind of blowing out of their mouth or using their tail. And then badger moles, of course, can earthbend. Probably it ends up I think in terms of who wins being between the dragon and the sky bison, just because the badger moles are confined to the ground and the other 2 can fly and also land and still do some damage. So maybe the badger mole is just stuck on the ground while the other 2 fight, and then as they land, get tired, it gets the advantage and wins. But I'd probably give the advantage maybe just to the dragon, just because it seems like that they're animals. Most of them have fur. A little bit of fire gets on a sky bison. They're on fire. The same with the badger moles. So probably the dragon ends up winning. But I still think it would be a really cool fight. We didn't really have enough animal fights in Avatar: The Last Airbender. We had like Nyla versus Appa. We had Appa versus some animals as we went through the series, but nothing crazy as we went on. Nothing on the scale of what this fight, I suppose, would be. And number 6 is going to be Suki versus Asami. So, 2 kind of non-benders from the group. Each kind of group, not the most main character in each group, but they play a similar sort of role for each team. And I think these 2 in a fight would be really interesting because you have Suki as more of your classic warrior with the kind of traditional training. She's a member of the Kyoshi Warriors against Asami, who is a naturally skilled athlete. She has these skills with technology, and she brings more technological weapons into battle, whereas Suki's weaponry is more traditional. And I think it would be really interesting, just to see how that works. Like, Asami's like electricity glove against Suki's katana sword, her fans, and some of her armor. I'm not sure who'd win. Maybe Suki, just because she's a warrior by default, whereas Asami is kind of like, okay, she's this inventor, engineer character who also gets involved in the fights and is a powerful fighter by herself, but she's not a warrior by default. So maybe Suki ends up winning, but I still think it would make for a really interesting fight overall. Uh, Number 5, Gazan versus Bolin, but set at a time when Bolin is more skilled with lava bending. So basically, two master lava benders fighting each other, I think. Book 4 Bolin against Gazan as he was in Book 3. I think would be a very cool fight. Because, the Mako was kind of more the focus of their two final fights in Book 3. Because Bolin obviously was new to lava bending. It gave him a little bit of a chance in the fight, but Mako needed to help him. So in Book 4, with all the extra experience, I think it would make for a really interesting fight. It would allow us to get to see a lot more of what the kind of standard / really powerful lava bending moves actually are. Plus, I suppose, get to see more of their just normal earth bending as well. As for who'd win, I'm not really sure. I suppose this one might depend on the landscape it takes place in. And again, the experience would go to Gazan, probably being a lava bender for a longer time. But Bolin, has his little tricks and stuff like that. So I still think I'd like to see another fight between those two characters. But it's not going to happen. Gazan is dead, of course. Next up, number 4. Probably the biggest battle on this list, and that would just be, I'd like to just see this kind of huge fight between all of the avatars that we know of in their prime, basically. So you have like them all fight basically just after becoming like a fully realized avatar. You have all of them able to use all 4 elements, all of them able to use the avatar state, and it would be really interesting just to see who would win that fight. Would it be Wan as the original avatar, or would it be a case of that actually, like, he actually has these fairly old skills in the grand scheme of thing. He's not really used to using the avatar state that much. He may have learned some of the true ways of like firebending and stuff like that, but he all the advancement maybe in fighting techniques over the years maybe puts him at a disadvantage to some of the newer avatars and stuff like that. So I just think it would be an amazing fight just to get to see even just two avatars fighting 4 elements on 4 elements would be amazing to see. Let alone like 5 or 6 or however many. It'd just be a really over the top fight. Number 3 is probably one of the ones that came to mind first when I went to actually write up this list, and that is Iroh against Ozai, Battle of the Brothers. This is one that the show hints at, but comes up with a reason for it to not happen, that being that Iroh thinks that if he were to fight Ozai and defeat him, it would just be seen as another brother killing a brother to get power, and it wouldn't actually change anything in the same way as the Avatar beating Ozai would. But there's the setup for this throughout the whole thing that even though we don't ever really see Iroh in a really even fight where he could lose, that he is potentially the most powerful firebender in the show, and he could beat Ozai if he wanted to. But it's obviously the kind of personal thing that keeps him from actually getting into that fight. Ozai, we don't get to see fight a massive amount, but when we do see him fight, he gives Aang a really kind of tough time, and it's only some plot stuff with Aang and the Avatar state that actually allows him to win. But I think this fight, were to happen, whether it be with Sozin's Comet out or not, would be an amazing fight, because Ozai shows that he has a weakness in that he doesn't know lightning redirection, but he can generate lightning very quickly. Iroh also has lightning generation, but he also has lightning redirection, so he has the same advantage that Zuko and Aang had against him. Plus, Iroh knows the true way of firebending from the dragons. Ozai doesn't. Ozai's younger, that might give him an advantage, but Iroh still seems in pretty good shape, especially after he does all his workout stuff. So when he comes into the finale battle, he is actually in reasonably good shape. He also is more wise. He has more knowledge of the other elements as well, and not just all about firebending. So that potentially gives him an advantage as well. Um, but again, Ozai is younger. I think it would be really a really interesting fight because there's also this whole jealousy thing of that Ozai is kind of jealous of Iroh because he is the firstborn. He has the right to the throne, and it was only the loss of Liu Tan that really, and whatever Ozai and Ursa did, that got him the throne, basically. So there's a lot about this fight were it to ever happen. Um, I'd probably give the advantage to Iroh just because he does have those extra techniques and the extra kind of wisdom knowledge of kind of other fighting techniques and stuff like that. So really cool fight, definitely one of my kind of favorites that I came up with. And number two, another one that came straight to mind was Toph Boomy. Now we have seen this fight take place in one of the comic books, but it was, you know, specifically it was called Round 1. Specifically, there wasn't really any winner. It was in a comic book, so we didn't really get to see a lot of kind of focus too much on the fighting and who has the advantage and so on. But the idea in that comic was just that they were both very impressed with each other and that they probably were going to have another round. And I'd like to see the round 2. I'd like to see the round when the two finally have a winner between each other. And again, it's one of those things where Boomy is 112 years old. He has that much experience. Toph is only 12 years old. She has that much experience. But Toph is probably better connected with earthbending because of her blindness, and is probably naturally a more powerful earthbender in that sense. But Boomy's experience, his mad genius tactics might give an advantage over Toph, who's fairly straightforward when she fights, with regards to just she's very powerful, she's going to come at you full force. But Boomy has some tricks up his sleeve and some crazy techniques that I assume he's learned in his 100 plus years of bending. So I think it's a really cool fight that I'd love to see animated and come to some sort of a conclusion that someone beats the other one. As for who would win, I'm not really sure because again the age thing comes into play in that they kind of make a joke about how old Boomy is yet how great he is, but is the age actually a factor in this fight? I'm not really sure. Maybe if it went on for a very long time, Toph would have the advantage, but at the same time, she's used to kind of ending fights very quickly. Does she have the stamina that Boomy has? It's very even, and I really don't know if I could pick a winner. My number one pick, but I wouldn't say this list is in any way in order. Like this is the fight I want to see more than anything else. But this is again was one of the first ones I came up with in terms of like a really cool fantasy fight that probably will never happen. We will never happen, and that is Sokka versus Jet versus Zuko versus Piandao in a sword fight. Now, this is basically our four key sword fighting characters in the series, and I'd like to see them all just fight against each other in this kind of four-way sword battle. There's some really interesting dynamics going on here in that both Zuko and Sokka were trained in sword fighting by Piandao. Piandao himself is a master sword fighter. And then Jet has shown himself in the few episodes that we see him to be a really expert sword fighter as well with his interesting kind of hooked swords. So I think it would be a really cool fight because you have Sokka and Piandao take on the single sword into battle while Jet and Zuko both use kind of dual wield swords. And that would be interesting to see just like who, when the fight first starts, who squares off against each other, because it's inevitably the fight would end up being like two one-on-one fights and then gradually they just kind of switch up and stuff would happen. Sokka has the advantage in terms of like whatever terrain they're in, he could probably make most advantage of it the best, as he did against Piandao. Because we saw in, I think, one of the comics called Sword Bending, when Sokka and Zuko fought, Zuko was naturally the better swordsman, and Jet and Piandao are probably better swordsmen than Sokka, but he has the advantage because he's intelligent when he fights, uses terrain to his advantage, and with more than one opponent in the fight, he'd probably use the others to his advantage and stay on the outside, and then, like, you know, Would you allow them to use their other techniques? Like, could Zuko add in a bit of firebending? Could Sokka add in his boomerang? I'm not really sure. You know, it'd be all about what rules you set up for the fight. But as for who would win, you know, maybe you'd say Pian Dao if it was just a straight up sword fight. He is the master after all. Um, but just in terms of sword skills on their own, it's probably like Pian Dao is the best. Um, then Zuko, then Jet, then Sokka. But as I said, you'd almost maybe reverse that completely when it comes to like battle intelligence, maybe. So I'm not really sure who'd win. Maybe like on just straight away, just thinking of who'd win, I'd maybe go with Zuko, just because he seems like the kind of best mix of kind of both. But at the same time, I can almost see Sokka winning it just because he is so intelligent, and that is such a big part. And that, at the end of the day, Pian Dao, when he was teaching Sokka, thought him more about the intelligence side of sword fighting than the actual technique. And that was probably for a reason, in that if you know, no matter how good you are at technical sword fighting, unless you can actually think well in a battle, you can't actually win. But it's definitely a fight I'd like to see. One of the things that I think was missing from Avatar: The Legend of Korra, was that we didn't really see a lot of characters fight with melee weapons, and we didn't really see a lot of non-bender fighting. And I don't think we even saw a single character use a sword or carry a sword in the series, and that was a little bit of a disappointment, given how like cool some of our sword characters were in this show. But that is the end of the video, and as I said, I don't have a plan for what topic I'm going to do for the next Avatar Top 10 next week. So in the comments, let me know what you think I should do for next week's video, and of course, let me know what your thoughts were on my picks, what you would pick as your top fantasy fights in Avatar and Korra. I really want to read some of them in the comments. So thanks for watching this video, and bye.